Hi everyone, welcome to the Preservation Resource Center's live online class for today, May 15th. We are going to be hearing part 2 of Robert Cangelosi's Urban History of New Orleans today. I want to thank you all for being here with us today. Thank you to everyone who is joining us and making this event possible. I see a lot of members in our audience today. Thank you to our PRC members. You guys are truly what make the PRC's work possible. If you're not yet a member, please consider joining the PRC. We value our members, and you guys really do keep us running all year round. Our members also receive incredible benefits, including home delivery of our award-winning Preservation in Print magazine 9 times a year. And members also receive discounts on all sorts of PRC events and merchandise and other wonderful things. We also have an incredible member perk coming up next week. We have an exclusive virtual tour of the World Trade Center Four Seasons site open only to members. So if you are a member, please look for the information for that on our website and social media. You can RSVP to our membership coordinator, Witten Payne, and then with your RSVP, you can receive the password and link to come to that event. It's going to be really incredible. We have the contractors and architects on hand to answer questions and show you around the building as it stands now, plus talk a little bit about the history of the building and how the renovation has gone. So please consider joining us for that. If you're not yet a member and would like to come to that event, please, you can join the PRC today and get yourself ready for that event next week. It's Thursday, May 21st at 5:30 p.m., all done via Zoom. We also have incredible merchandise available. If you'd like to support the PRC that way, you can go to our shop at prcno.org. We have wonderful cheeky t-shirts available. We have an incredible coffee table book called Building on the Past that has gorgeous photography by Chris Granger, and it's a wonderful, wonderful book. So you can support us that way if that's your fit. Also, I would like to thank Stephen Richard Parnes for sponsoring our online programming during this time. Stephen is a wonderful supporter, a longtime supporter of the PRC, and when he found out that we were doing this type of free live programming while everyone's stuck at home, he wanted to help us make sure that that was possible. If anyone else out there is interested in sponsoring any of PRC's programming and our online programming that we're doing now, please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to our development director, Katie Fayard, at kfayard@prcno.org. You can see her email address on your screen. Or, as always, feel free to reach out to me anytime at smohan@prcno.org. If you are watching in Zoom, you're correct that your video is off and your mic is off, but you are still welcome to ask questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical difficulties, the chat function is available. You can send me a chat if you've got some problems or you can't hear anything. If you're watching on Facebook right now, thank you so much for joining us. We love to have you, and we hope that you guys enjoy the presentation. If you'd like to ask questions at future presentations, you are welcome to join through the Zoom platform to be able to interact with us a bit more, but we're still glad you're here. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Robert Cangelosi, who is the president of Koch & Wilson and an incredible architect and preservationist. He's on the Architectural Review Committee for the Historic District Landmarks Commission and has worked closely with the PRC for many, many years. We are honored to have him here today to teach us this second half of his urban history of New Orleans. He's going to talk about the post-Reconstruction up through present day New Orleans, and we're happy to have him. So Robbie, you're on.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming back. Someone has asked a question, can they see part 1? I do believe part 1 has been recorded, and maybe you can tell them how they can go to the cloud or something to do that.
Yep, all of our classes are available at prcno.org. If you go to our homepage, there's a really quick link to a list of almost all of the classes that we've done with the link to the video for those classes. So that's the easiest way to view part 1.
Great. Also, I had a couple of questions last time that I've got the answers for. First of all, someone asked about when the last time the Morganza Spillway was open. That's coming into the section we're going to be into now. The Morganza was built in 1954 and has only been opened twice, 1973 and 2011. Someone asked did I get some of the maps from? Some of them came from the History of Regional Growth by the Regional Planning Commission. Some of them came from the Vieux, Its Plan, Its Growth, Its Architecture, written by Sam Wilson. There may have been some other maps from other sources in that. But we're going to pick up today in the post-Reconstruction era. This period is generally considered to be the city's golden age. The economy and culture of the city is going to rebound with some of the city's more celebrated elements developing during this period. For example, most of the cast iron galleries that you see in the French Quarter were all added during this period. They're not original to those buildings. They are retrofit. We began to see some of the larger homes along St. Charles Avenue being built in the Queen Anne, East Lake, and Colonial Revival styles. We see uptown New Orleans begin to expand, particularly with the World's Fair in what is today Audubon Park. Carnival crews will begin to really flower and prosper during this time frame. The 12th Night Revels will be established in 1870. The crew of Rex and Momus in 1872. The crew of Proteus in 1882. Storyville, the city's red light district, and jazz are going to come into existence during this period. Now, with the aid of Northern Capital, the city's economy is going to take an upturn. In 1871, the Cotton Exchange, which you see here on the screen, is going to open in the Central Business District, followed by the Produce and Sugar Exchange in the French Quarter. That year, the city will purchase the Foucher estate for what would become Audubon Park. It's really weird that City Park is owned by the state, Audubon Park is owned by the city. In 1873, French painter Edgar Degas visited his family in New Orleans and created his first impressionistic painting here in the city. The Cotton Factors was painted in his family's office on Perdido Street. Between 1874 and 1879, Eads Jetties reopened the mouth of the Mississippi River. And if you recall from the previous class, the mouth began to silt on up, which was a problem for the growth of the city of New Orleans. Now, New Orleans is going to expand its rail service so much so that by the 1880s, 5 major lines are going to be entering the city of New Orleans. In 1881, New Orleans' Marie Laveau passed away in her St. Anne Street residence in the French Quarter. She was born in New Orleans in 1801 of African, European, and Native American descent. She married Santo Domingue refugee Jacques Paris and later Jean Glapion, and they had many children. She was a hairdresser and was a renowned practicer of voodoo, sought out by many New Orleanians for her advice and gris-gris. In order to showcase the city's post-Civil War prosperity, New Orleans hosted the World's Industrial and Cotton Centennial Exhibition in 1884 in what is today Audubon Park. The fair was the first to be illuminated by electric lights. The largest building in the world up to that time frame was constructed on the grounds. The Liberty Bell was on exhibit, and there was a demonstration that the streetcars could actually be run by electricity rather than being pulled by mules. Unfortunately, the fair was plagued by scandal and corruption. Its president fled the country with its assets. Many of the exhibits sat unopened on the wharves. The grounds were insufficiently prepared, and visitors had to wade through muddy fields, as you see in some of the pictures here. The Ku Klux Klan threatened to steal the Liberty Bell as it traveled to New Orleans. It was accompanied by Philadelphia police officers. As a financial disaster, the fair quickly closed. It was reopened several times in hopes of breaking even, but creditors eventually seized the buildings in an attempt to recoup their money by selling the construction materials. Now, many people uptown New Orleans claim that their houses or buildings are relocated from the World's Fair. It really has not happened. There was just one monument on Esplanade that really survives from that fair. In time for the fair, a monument to Robert E. Lee at Lee Circle was dedicated in 1884. One positive outgrowth of the 1884 World's Fair was the evolution of the women's exhibit into Newcomb College in 1886. Newcomb was the first institution of higher education for women in the South, and its art department will gain national reputation for its Art Nouveau pottery seen in the upper left corner there. In 1889, Confederate President Jefferson Davis died in New Orleans in the Garden District. He laid in state at Gallier Hall and was temporarily interred in Metairie Cemetery. During the 1880s and 1890s, there was a literary awakening here in the city of New Orleans, with Scribner's and Harper's Magazine reporting on the city, the fair, and the Creoles. Noted authors George Washington Cable and Grace King, as well as Lafatio Hearn, worked for these magazines, then publishing their own works here in the city of New Orleans. Between 1870 and 1910, the population of New Orleans jumped from 191,000 to 339,000. City services began to increase during this time frame. Telephones were introduced in 1879. Its operators were all young men known as the Hello Boys. Electricity was initially introduced through the Southwest Brush Electric Light Company for street lights in 1881, and then through the Edison Electric Company in 1886 for incandescent lights. You will still find around the city of New Orleans some of the light standards which have EECO, which stands for Edison Electric Company. I know there's some in Rosa Park, in Jackson Square, in light standards in the French Quarter. Mark Twain noted in his 1883 book, Life on the Mississippi River, that New Orleans had more electricity than New York City. An amalgamation of electric companies were merged in 1926 into the New Orleans Public Service, now known as Energy. In 1891, a professional fire company was introduced, replacing numerous volunteer companies. The streetcars were electrified throughout the city in 1893, and it had been demonstrated at the fair that this could be done. The current drainage system began in 1899 and the city sewage system in 1903. Now, although New Orleans had a water system as early as 1823, it was not until 1909 that it had a sanitary water system taking water from the Mississippi River, replacing the cisterns in town. Now, during the last quarter of the 19th century, a large number of Sicilians immigrated into New Orleans, which became the largest port of immigration for Sicilians in the nation. This is actually my grandmother right here in this image from the French Quarter. Many settled in the French Quarter, which became known as Little Sicily. These Sicilians worked in low-paying jobs on the docks and sold produce in the French market. However, with the Sicilians came the mafia, or the stoppers, as they were initially known locally. The mafia is introduced into the United States here in the city of New Orleans in the 1860s, and then branch off to other cities such as New York and Chicago. In 1890, New Orleans Chief of Police David Hennessy was assassinated, supposedly by the mafia. Hennessy, who had been investigating the mafia, was gunned down as he tried to mediate between warring factions. Hennessy had received national recognition for arresting in 1881 Giuseppe Esposito, a fugitive mafia boss from Sicily, wanted for kidnapping a British diplomat, cutting off his ears and sending him to the wife along with his demand. Parliament placed a bounty on his head. He fled Sicily and came to New Orleans, where he was eventually arrested by Hennessy. Now, after in 1891, a jury acquitted the Sicilians of Hennessy's murder due to lack of evidence, locals, urged by the mayor, stormed parish prison, round up and lynched 11 Sicilians, the single largest lynching in American history. An international crisis ensued for President Harrison. Italy withdrew its ambassador, and America feared an attack by the Italian Navy, the third largest in the world at the time frame. Rumors of war were rampant. Attacks against Italian immigrants occurred in other major cities, and Italian Americans responded with massive rallies. Eventually, the United States paid an indemnity to the relatives of the slain men. The incident, however, made America aware that it needed a modern navy. It was relying on the remnants of its navy from the Civil War. The buildup of the American Navy at this time frame, as a result of this incident, would result in America developing a world-class navy, eventually letting us win the Spanish-American War. In the meantime, Incidents involving the mafia were so common in the French Quarter that Lower Decatur Street became known as Vendetta Alley. In 1890, Louisiana became the first state to legalize prize fighting, and in 1892, the Olympic Company sponsored the World Heavyweight Championship here in New Orleans, Colbert versus Sullivan. In 1978, the heavyweight championship was again fought in New Orleans when Muhammad Ali beat Leonard Spinks in the Superdome, watched on television by 2 billion people worldwide in 80 nations. In 1891, the Board of Commissioners for City Park was established to convert the land gift of John McDonough, which we talked about last time, into what would become one of the largest urban parks in the nation. Work on the park began as early as 1851, but it was not very substantial. Also in 1891, the city got its first residential park, Rosa Park. These residential parks were pre-zoning attempts to control land usage on these streets. The concept began in New York and is really perfected in St. Louis and then is eventually introduced into New Orleans. 1891, it's the year that the state got its first historical museum, Memorial Hall, which opened up on Camp Street. The following year, in 1892, Homer Plessy, who was self-described as 7/8 white and 1/8 black, bought a ticket on a train bound from New Orleans to Covington, Louisiana. Plessy sat in the whites-only car, challenging the state's racially segregated coaches. The case winds up in the U.S. Supreme Court as Plessy versus Ferguson, in which the concept of separate but equal was held constitutional. This ruling remained in effect until 1954, when it's overturned by the case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. At the close of the 19th century, in 1894, a school of architecture will be established at Tulane University, the 5th school of architecture in the nation. As the French Quarter declined in 1895, the city proposed to demolish the Cabildo and the Presbytery and replace them with Beaux-Arts structures. After the proposal was blocked, land was purchased in the 400 block of Royals and Charter Streets, and buildings were raised for a courthouse built in 1907. As late as 1920, proposals were being made for demolishing much of the French Quarter in the name of slum clearance, as you see in the lower left-hand corner. The only thing implemented was the Municipal Auditorium. This would be Congo Square. Here is the French Quarter, and here you see 6 squares of the French Quarter to be leveled with a Los Angeles-style city hall, a train museum, art museums, and so forth. Excuse me. On February 14th and 15th, 1895, during Carnival, New Orleans recorded its most extensive snowfall, 8.2 inches. Rex, the king of Carnival, rode with the frozen beer that year. That same year, a fire destroyed much of Algiers Point on the West Bank, and the city built its new criminal courts building, which was on the site of the present Maine Public Library. The economic growth of the post-Civil War years was accompanied by the organization of scores of labor unions during the 1880s and the 1890s. Violence sometimes occurred when workers went out on strike for better pay and working conditions. In 1881, martial law was declared in the city during a strike by white and black cotton workers. In 1892, a strike by the streetcar drivers of the city of New Orleans led to a citywide strike of all unions, which shut down the city of New Orleans. This is the only time in American history when all unions observed the picket line of a single union. In 1895, dock workers' riots saw the end to biracial union pacts when the economic panic of 1893 produced a race for the bottom in salaries. There was this cooperative agreement, but when things got tight, everybody abandoned the agreement and they would take a job for whatever they could. African Americans abandoned their unions and worked for lower wages, breaking an agreement that had been worked out. 6 African American non-union workers were killed during the strike. New Orleans Dock Board was created in 1896 by the state to revitalize the port after the state recognized the Port of New Orleans' impact on the entire state's economy. The port began to demolish the existing facilities in 1901 and then to rebuild the port. The year 1896 marks the opening of America's first movie house, although some historians dispute whether it's the first or not. This is VITASCOPE Hall at 625 Canal Street. During colonial times here in New Orleans, prostitution was an accepted fact of life. You recall that some of the earliest settlers that law had sent to New Orleans were the prostitutes from Paris prisons. Prostitution here in New Orleans was legal unless a woman became disorderly. During the 1830s through the 1850s, laws regulated where prostitutes could work. In 1857, prostitutes were actually licensed by the city of New Orleans, and many of them worked in the French Quarter. The city created Storyville in 1897 on the fringe of the French Quarter in what would become America's largest red light district ever. Jazz flourished here, where musicians like Jelly Roll Martin played in the brothels along Basin Street, but jazz was also developing in other neighborhoods around the town. Storyville operated legally for 20 years until it was closed in 1917 after the U.S. entered World War I, and the Secretary of the Navy, fearing for the health of his men, threatened to remove naval facilities from New Orleans. Storyville continued to actually operate illegally until 1940, when it was torn down for a public housing project. Now, the battleship Maine was blown up in Havana's harbor in 1898, leading to the Spanish-American War. Here in New Orleans, Camp Foster opened up at the fairgrounds. At Jackson Barracks was expanded during this time frame for the war effort. In 1898, a new state constitution disenfranchised the vast majority of Louisiana's African-American citizens through the grandfather clause excuse me, that revoked one's right to vote if one's ancestors were not eligible to vote prior to the 1868 state constitution, which had enfranchised African-American citizens. This new state constitution was declared illegal by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1915, at which time the state passed literacy requirements to prevent African Americans from voting. This 1898 Constitution, however, gave white women who owned property the right to vote in property tax issues only. Nationwide, women's suffrage was generally suppressed, especially here in the South. An early local suffrage movement began in 1878 when women were declared not to have the legal authority to witness a will at St. Anna's Asylum by the Louisiana courts. Caroline Merritt, founder of the Portier Club in 1892, was an affiliate of the American Women's Suffrage Association, and Kate Cordine of the ERA, or the Equal Rights for All Club, in 1896 worked for female suffrage. Both of these groups lobbied the 1898 state constitution for women's suffrage. However, they were only successful in getting women the right to vote on property tax issues. Women would not gain suffrage until the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in 1920. In 1898, there was a very large fire at the corner of Canal and Bourbon Street, destroying numerous historic buildings along Canal Street and in the French Quarter. In 1899, Booker T. Washington made the first of his 3 visits here to the city of New Orleans. He toured 4 of the city's African-American universities and was received at Gallier Hall by the mayor and gave an address at the Central Congregationalist Church, which you see on the right. He would return again in 1902 and in 1915. 1899 was a very cold year. And here in New Orleans, the Mississippi River began to freeze up, as you see in some of these illustrations on the right side. Now, New Orleans entered the 20th century with a great deal of optimism. The nation had just emerged victorious from the Spanish-American War, and here at home, the face of New Orleans was beginning to change. New mansions were being built in the uptown area. Skyscrapers began to dot the central business district. Subdivisions like Gentilly and Lakeview began to spring up near Lake Pontchartrain. City and Audubon parks became realities. The eclectic architectural styles such as the Tudor Revival, the Chateauesque style, and the Byzantine Revival styles became popular, as well as some newer styles from the arts and crafts movement, such as the California and Craftsman style employed generally for bungalows. Unfortunately, a race riot in New Orleans drew national headlines at the beginning of the 20th century. On July 23, 1900, 3 white policemen approached 2 African-American men, Robert Charles, seen here, and Leonard Price, seen here on Dryett Street. A scuffle ensued. Shots were exchanged. Charles and one of the police officers were wounded. Charles fled. He was tracked down to his house on 4th Street, where he shot and killed 2 police officers and escaped again. Rioting started the next day as mobs of angry white men, unable to find Charles, brutally assaulted and killed African-American citizens. On July 27th, Charles was discovered in a building in the 1200 block of Saratoga Street. There he shot and killed 2 more police officers, and a mob reported at 15,000 in addition to the state militia surrounded the house. Bullets peppered the house. Charles responded with shots that killed and wounded more people. A mob set fire to the house in order to smoke Charles on out. He emerged firing, and when it was all over, his body was riddled with at least 34 bullets. Charles killed a total of 5 people and wounded 20 in the gun battle of that single day alone. In the aftermath, 10 African Americans were arrested and indicted on first-degree murder charges as accomplices to Robert Charles. All of them were acquitted. Non-whites were arrested and indicted for murders of blacks. Only 1 was convicted of manslaughter. 2 whites were indicted for inciting a riot but were never brought to trial. 5 police officers were found guilty of cowardice of duty. Now, the new century, on a brighter note, saw the opening of a historical museum, the Louisiana State Museum, in 1906, the new main public library, funded by Andrew Carnegie, in 1908, an art museum known as the Delgado Museum of Art opened in 1911, and the construction of new campus buildings at Tulane and Loyola universities. In 1901, President William McKinley became the first sitting U.S. president to visit New Orleans. Now, we had other presidents come here, but they weren't as sitting presidents. There'll be a whole list of presidents after McKinley, which will eventually visit the city of New Orleans, coming all the way down to the current president. Now, the year of McKinley's visit, a baby was born to a 16-year-old Mary Armstrong. The father, William, would abandon his family shortly thereafter on their Jane Place house in the Battlefield neighborhood of New Orleans, which is now wiped on out around the Criminal Courts building. Their son would grow up to be one of the city's most famous sons, obviously Louis Armstrong. In 1901, a hurricane caused a great deal of flooding to the city of New Orleans as the river rose 7 feet and the Carondelet Canal allowed Lake Pontchartrain water to come into the back of the city of New Orleans. Communities along the lakefront were hardest hit. There were reports of people trying to survive that hurricane in refrigerated coolers out in the Lakeview section as the neighborhood is being destroyed. Kingsley House, operated by the Episcopal Church, opened in 1901 to help the city's indigent. In 1903, the United Confederate Veterans held a national convention in New Orleans with 30,000 veterans and 50,000 guests staging a 6-mile-long parade. The organization was established here in the city of New Orleans in 1889. Now, this is one of the first of many major conventions which will come to New Orleans, and of course, as we know today, this business is very important to the city's economy. Now, the New Orleans Symphony Society was organized in 1908, and the muffaletta was invented at Central Grocery Store on Decatur Street in 1906. Now, the New Orleans Public Belt Railroad began in 1908, and there was a major fire which occurred in the French Quarter in this year, which destroyed 44 buildings and 6 blocks in the French Quarter, causing a great deal of damage. The Krewe of Zulu established or held its first parade in 1909, and on April 25th, 1909, St. Louis Cathedral was bombed. Initially, it was blamed on the Black Hand. A Sicilian tinsmith named Ferdinand Palma, living in Madame John's Legacy, was arrested along with Angelo Cabrucci. They were held at the Cabildo's jail cell, and a mob quickly developed. Fearing another lynching like the 1881, they were moved to another prison. The two were eventually released for lack of evidence. Then the bombing was thought to be the result of a labor dispute between an Italian contractor working on the cathedral and his laborers. This also was proved to be baseless. No one was ever convicted for the bombing of St. Louis Cathedral. 1909 would be the last year that the New Orleans Mint would be issuing its currency. In 1910, the American Institute of Architects was organized a local chapter here in the city of New Orleans following a rigged design competition held for the Whitney Bank for its new headquarters. In 1913, the A.I.A. would hold its national convention here in the city of New Orleans and will return several more times thereafter. Transportation venues expanded during the early 20th century period, with construction of new highways and bridges. The first airplane arrived in New Orleans in 1910. Planes initially operated out of the cow pastures at City and Audubon Park. The FAA designation for today's Louis Armstrong International Airport, MSY, stands for the Moisant Stockyards, where the planes originally operated from. When the airport was built in 1958, it was originally named John Moisant, a local aviation pioneer who died in a plane crash not far from the site of the airport. In 1900, Walter Reed identified the cause of yellow fever in Cuba. In response, New Orleans outlawed the use of cisterns for drinking water, which were a breeding ground for the mosquitoes. The last yellow fever epidemic occurred in the city of New Orleans in 1905. And in working on my book for the French Quarter right now, I've come across a house that I had 6 Sicilians dying in the house in 1905 due to yellow fever, and the greatest impact seemed to be with the Sicilian community in the French Quarter. 1905, it's also the year that GALATOIRE'S restaurant opened up in the French Quarter on Bourbon Street. Albert Baldwin invented the wood screw pumps in 1913, which helped to drain the city of New Orleans. In fact, some of these original pumps are still in operation today. Newer ones are actually patterned after his original designs. In 1914, the federal government built a new post office designed by noted American architects Hale and Rogers on Lafayette Square. Today, it is the 5th District Court of Appeals. Now, New Orleans worked very hard to get the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition, as it was the logical point to celebrate the opening of the Panama Canal. It was proposed to be built along the lakefront. After San Francisco got the fair, local businesses attempted to hold a Southern Exposition simultaneously with the California Fair along Lake Pontchartrain. This also did not happen, which turned out to be very fortunate because that year in 1915, a hurricane that produced sustained winds of 120 miles per hour and dumped 22 inches of rain in the city caused $13 million in 1915 dollars to the city of New Orleans. And there were 275 deaths here in the city of New Orleans. Now, the Little Theater was established in 1916 in the French Quarter and is one of the oldest community theaters in the nation today. In September of 1918, 2 ships brought into the port of New Orleans the Spanish influenza. The following month, the national epidemic spread throughout the city. In New Orleans, there were 54,089 cases and 3,489 deaths, representing 6.5% of the city's population. Only Philadelphia and Pittsburgh had higher death rates. World War I activities revived port traffic, and there was a move for improvement of the port facilities. As a result of federal legislation intended to move war supplies quickly, barge traffic on the Mississippi River flourished. A new public grain elevator and a very large Army supply base were built here in New Orleans. Army camps arose in sites throughout the city, at the Fairgrounds Racetrack, City Park, West End, and even Tulane University. The federal government at this time frame acquired the privately owned Harvey Canal water rights for the transportation of military goods at this time frame. On December 9, 1919, Lyle Saxon wrote in the Times-Picayune, "The heart of the French Quarter stopped beating when the French Opera House burned." The destruction of this cultural center seemed to signal the inevitable loss of this decaying neighborhood. 1918 and 1919 saw the city, and particularly its Sicilian citizens, terrorized by a serial killer known as the Axman, who hacked to death his victims at night in their beds. Someone claiming to be the killer wrote the Times-Picayune on March 13, 1919, stating that he would kill again 6 days later, just past midnight. However, if a household played jazz, it would be spared from murder. That night, New Orleans was filled with jazz, and there was no attack of anyone. The attacks abruptly ended in October of that year, and the killer was never caught. In 1919, the Southern Baptist Convention, meeting in New Orleans, established the Baptist Bible Institution, which in 1949 became the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. It was originally located in the Garden District, as you see in the upper right there, but moved in 1953 to a new campus designed by A. Hale's Town on a former 17-acre pecan orchard in Gentilly, seen in the lower left. The Inner Harbor Navigational Canal, or the Industrial Canal, opened in 1923, connecting the Mississippi River with Lake Pontchartrain. Now, you recall this was a dream and vision from the founding of the city of New Orleans, and Canal Street takes its name from a canal which was never built. The post-World War I Roaring '20s was an era of prosperity and urban growth here in the city of New Orleans. During that decade, the Lost Generation, or the Dixie Bohemia, discovered the Vieux Carre, which had been on decline. The charm of the old, decaying buildings, the inexpensive rents, drew a bohemian group of artists and writers to the French Quarter. Among the artists would be William and Ellsworth Woodward, Alfred Millet, Boyd Cruz, and the New Orleans Arts and Crafts Club. Authors such as Lyle Saxon, William Faulkner, Tennessee Williams, Sherwood Anderson, John Steinbeck, and Lyle Saxon, and Francis Parkinson Keyes would begin working in the French Quarter. Many of the writers contributed to the Double Dealer, a very influential literary magazine based here in the city of New Orleans, which began circulation in 1921. Several of the artists, authors, and architects joined the preservation efforts to save the Vieux Carre from demolition. The Petite Salon was established in the French Quarter in 1924. It is a ladies' social club to help preserve the city's distinctive French Quarter. And working on this French Quarter book, I'm finding that there were a lot of these groups developing during this time frame to help save the French Quarter. In 1925, the Vieux Carre Commission was established, and in 1936, the French Quarter became the nation's second historic district with design controls. The population of New Orleans in 1920 was 387,219, of which 39% were African Americans. More and more automobiles began to crowd the streets. Newer and taller buildings were being erected in the central business district, such as the Hibernia Bank Building, now the Capital One, which was built in 1921, the Union Indemnity Building in 1924, the Père Marquette Building in 1925, and the National American Bank in 1929. Elsewhere around town, Tulane Stadium was built in 1926, and the Municipal Auditorium seen here and the Criminal Courts Building in 1929 were built. Local tourism got a boost with the construction of the Gyeong, Bienville, and Pontchartrain hotels, and major expansions of the Monteleone and Roosevelt hotels. The upper end of Bourbon Street changed from a residential street to an entertainment district, particularly to serve the sailors and soldiers during World War I. Movies were all the rage during the 1920s, with 15 theaters and 15 Nickelodeons in New Orleans. The Strand on Canal Street, which opened in 1917, was the city's first full-length movie theater, featuring an organ and a 20-member orchestra to accompany the silent movies. Other major theaters that opened during the 1920s was the Orpheum in 1921, the Low State scene here, 1926. I love Mickey and Minnie sitting in the automobiles in front of it, and the Sanger Theater in 1927. By the end of the 1920s, there were 24 public markets operated by the city of New Orleans, and our urban parks were flourishing. Audubon Park opened its zoo in 1924, and the largest swimming pool in the South in 1928. City Park tripled in size during the 1920s, adding its casino building in 1923 and a pool in 1925. West End Park, with its elaborate fountain, with dancing water, light show, and an organ, was completed in 1921. Delgado College was founded in 1921. Xavier became a university for African American Catholics in 1925, and the 5-mile-long bridge across Lake Pontchartrain opened in 1928. The Catholic Church remained a significant force here in the city of New Orleans. By 1929, there were 52 parishes in the city, and I'm talking about the city proper, not the suburbs, each with its own church and parochial grammar school. There were 8 Catholic colleges and high schools for boys, and 13 academies and high schools for girls. In 1922, Notre Dame Seminary was dedicated. Today, New Orleans has 3 Catholic colleges, Loyola, Holy Cross, and Xavier, and 32 Catholic schools. The Volstead Act of 1919 brought prohibition to the city of New Orleans. Yeah, right, sure. On June 30th, 1919, Mayor Martin Berman announced that the city police department would enforce the law. While there were several public raids and closures of bars and breweries, alcohol just flowed throughout the city of New Orleans, as did gambling and prostitution, all of which were illegal during the 1920s. Now, the Carondelet Canal was purchased by the state in 1908 and filled in between 1927 and 1938. Until 2015, it was actually used for a rail line. Today we're going to see it as the Lafitte Greenway. Now, the Jesuits who returned to New Orleans in 1837, you recall they were expelled by the monarchy and the Pope during the colonial period. They operated the city's first radio station, WWL, in 1922 at Loyola University. The following year, WDSU radio began. Now, I know I'm showing the TV tower here, but I'm talking about radio. In the call letters, W was the federal government's designation for east of the Mississippi. Now, you think W would mean west of the Mississippi, but in the infinite wisdom of the federal government, W stands for east of the Mississippi. D stood for the DeSoto Hotel, from which they were broadcasting. S stood for the state's Items newspaper. All radio stations were affiliated with the print media. And U stood for the Udall family, which owned the station. By 1929, there were 5 radio stations operating in the city of New Orleans. On Good Friday, 1927, the entire city was flooded with 14 inches of rain. The Mississippi River threatened to overflow its banks until April 29, 1927, when the levees below New Orleans were dynamited to allow the water levels to fall. This is the only time the levees have been dynamited. We heard rumors of it happening in Katrina, in Betsy, and all sorts of periods. This is the only one that we can actually substantiate that the levees were dynamited, which flooded and destroyed St. Bernard and Plaquemine parishes. The April to May floods of 1927 were the worst in American history. It devastated 1.3 million acres along the Mississippi River, wiping out entire cities. It left in Louisiana 300,000 homeless. Following the flood of 1927, New Orleans became the nation's most flood-protected city, or at least that's what we were told, with a very elaborate levees, flood walls, and gates, as well as a spillway. 1927 is also the year that Dr. Alton Ochsner became a medical professor and chair of Tulane's Department of Surgery. He would later establish a teaching program at Charity Hospital and establish Ochsner Clinic in 1942, now known as the Ochsner Medical Center. Dr. Ochsner would be among one of the first to establish a link between cigarettes and cancer. In 1928, a plan was developed for the lakefront improvements, which included a seawall, creation of 2,000 new acres of land, an airport, amusement park, residential tracts, green space. However, this plan will not be implemented until the Great Depression. The city adopted its first comprehensive zoning plan in 1929. That same year, a streetcar strike shut down the city. Violence occurred between strikers and strike breakers was very prevalent throughout the city of New Orleans. Martin's Restaurant fed free sandwiches, which they called the poor boys, to the striking streetcar drivers. This is the legendary beginning of this New Orleans culinary institution or tradition. Now, there's been some recent research to indicate that the poor boy may have in fact existed before this time frame. This is going back to my beginning about myths around town and so forth. I'm not a culinary historian, but I'm reading now that it may have existed before the strike. In 1929, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre took place in Chicago. That same year, Al Capone came to New Orleans to try to get the local mafia boss, Silver Dollar Sam, to side with him in his fight with his rival in Chicago and to supply him with liquor rather than his rival. A meeting at the New Orleans train station, Silver Dollar Sam was accompanied by several New Orleans police officers who disarmed Al Capone's bodyguards, broke their fingers, and sent Capone back to Chicago with his tail between his legs, not getting what he wanted. Seems like our mafia was stronger than Al Capone. Now, during the first 3 decades of the 20th century, the city was controlled by a Tammany Hall-style political machine headed by Mayor Martin Berman. This group called themselves the Regular Democratic Organization, or the Choctaw Club, which was governed by a council of 17, comprised of the leaders of the city's 17 wards. This council made all political decisions. All city employees had to belong to the organization, and along with all elected officials, had to kick back 10% of their salaries to the political machine. Businesses, bordellos, and gambling halls all had to contribute to the Choctaw Club's war chest. After Mayor Martin Berman's death in 1926, Governor Huey Pierce Long in 1928 filled the political void. The flamboyant Long, with his every man a king philosophy, continued the Choctaws' patronage kickback approach to jobs. Long was perpetually at odds with the city of New Orleans, and in 1929, the Times-Picayune led an unsuccessful campaign to impeach the governor. In 1932, after feuding with New Orleans Mayor T. Sims Wormley and the Regular Democratic Organization, Huey Long passed laws giving the state control of the city's police, fire, registrar of voters, sewage department, and water department, He took away the city's right of taxation, forcing the city into insolvency. Long and Walmsley escalated the feud in 1934. Long sent in the National Guard to New Orleans to seize control of the registrar of voters' offices and other city offices. Walmsley called out the city police and deputized citizens. Heavily armed men struggled for control of the city of New Orleans. And if you've ever seen any of the newsreels from this time frame, it looks like Nazi Germany in here with all these police running around with their machine guns and so forth. Now, after Huey Long's assassination in 1935, his political organization continued its war in the city of New Orleans. One by one, political officials surrendered. Mayor Walmsley was forced to resign from office in 1936. Robert Maestri, a staunch Long supporter, was certified by the Long machine as the only candidate and became mayor of the city of New Orleans without an election. Maestri, the city's first mayor of Italian descent, is best known for asking President Franklin Roosevelt at Antoine's while they were dining, "How you like them there oysters, Mr. President?" Now, during his administration, a deal was struck with Silver Dollar Sam, the local gangster, mafia boss here in New Orleans, which allowed illegal gambling and prostitution to flourish, with the city getting a cut of the proceeds. Now, with the Great Depression came severe unemployment. In 1933, 5 of the city's banks and numerous homesteads collapsed, and 18% of the city's population was forced onto federal relief. In New Orleans, as throughout the nation, jobs were created by federal work programs that funded the construction of new public buildings and facilities and renovated historic buildings in the city. Architects were put to work documenting the city's architectural legacy through the Historic American Building Survey, and our office was put in charge of it. And here you see the telegram over here where we were in charge of, let's see, it's all these states, Arkansas, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas are all through, are under this program to document the history. Excuse me. New capital projects in New Orleans included Audubon Park's Zoo, city park improvements such as the Roosevelt Mall, the City Park Stadium, the Botanical Gardens. Many of the streets and drainage projects took place throughout the city of New Orleans. The lakefront was filled in beginning in 1930, and construction of the Carre Spillway was completed in 1931. The Shushan Airport, a great Art Deco structure, was completed in 1934. The Huey Long Bridge, owned by the city of New Orleans still, was built in 1935, and a new charity hospital building opened in 1938, and it's undergoing a redevelopment for multi-purpose usages there. Now, during the 1930s, the Municipal Auditorium became home to the city's carnival balls. A Canal Street beautification project was dedicated in 1930. The Sugar Bowl began in 1935. The Catholic Church held its Eucharistic Congress here in the city of New Orleans in 1938, and the Zurich Golf Classic began operation in 1938. Pontchartrain Beach and Lincoln Beach amusement parks opened up along the shores of Lake Pontchartrain in 1939. In 1938, a very young Tennessee Williams arrived here in the city of New Orleans, and 9 years later, his streetcar named Desire debuted on Broadway. Although plans for an intercoastal waterway along the Gulf Coast can be traced to the 19th century, real efforts were not begun until the 20th century. The 1930 Federal Rivers and Harbors Act approved the Mobile to New Orleans stretch, and by 1933, the Lake Pontchartrain to Mississippi Sound portion was completed through New Orleans East. The entire 1,050-mile stretch from Florida to Texas will not be completed until 1949. In 1941, the city's first public housing development were built following passage of the Federal Housing Act of 1937. The original projects were the Magnolia, Calliope, Lafayette, and St. Bernard for African Americans, and the St. Thomas and Iberville's for whites. World War II brought prosperity to the city of New Orleans. A very small boat builder by the name of Andrew Jackson Higgins eventually employed 40,000 people building PT boats and landing crafts. Higgins was later called by President Dwight Eisenhower as the man who won the war for us, crediting the Higgins boats with the enabling of the landing of Allied forces in Normandy. Adolf Hitler called Higgins the American Noah. Beginning in 1942, the lakefront from West End to the Shushan Airport was lined with military installations. German U-boats patrolled the Gulf of Mexico, sinking ships as they came out of the port of New Orleans. It's rumored that they traveled up the Mississippi River as far as New Orleans, and supposedly some of them even got out and shopped at D.H. Holmes and Maison Blanche on Canal Street. On the west bank of the river, the federal government established in 1941 Camp Algiers, where Germans from South and Central America, believed to be Nazis, were held. In reality, many of these were German Jews who had fled Nazi Germany. During World War II, women filled the jobs traditionally held by men, such as streetcar conductors. After the war in 1946, Reform candidate Delesseps Chet Morrison was elected mayor. He was successful in obtaining a home rule charter for New Orleans, restoring many of the city's powers taken away by Huey Long. Under Morrison's administration, the Vieux Carre was threatened in 1946 when New York urban planner Robert Moses proposed a highway along the riverfront through the French Quarter. Morrison's administration created the New Orleans Recreational Department, or NORD, in 1947, offering a wide variety of activities for the citizens of the city of New Orleans, particularly its youth. The Spring Fiesta began that same year, 1947, to promote tourism and to showcase the city's architectural heritage. In 1948, WDSU became the city's first television station, broadcasting from the Hibernia Bank Tower. For the anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans that year, the Freedom Train made a stop here in New Orleans. The 7-car train, which ran from September of 47 to January of 1949, toured all 48 states in the Union and 300 cities, carrying 127 original documents, from a letter from Christopher Columbus to the United Nations Charter. It included an original copy of the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and Andrew Jackson's report on the Battle of New Orleans. A major requirement of the tour was that there be no segregation. Southern cities like Memphis, Birmingham, and Montgomery refused to comply. New Orleans was more than glad to comply and got extra days because of those cities' decisions not to participate. This was an early local civil rights victory. The NAACP held a meeting at the Booker T. Washington Auditorium to address the issue and successfully got the city to agree to the exhibition terms. The following year, Louis Armstrong reigned as Zulu, having major events in that same auditorium. Armstrong would not be the first celebrity to participate in the parade. The very first crew of Rex had a celebrity, which we talked about last time, which became the prototype for Uncle Sam. Now, during the late 1940s and early 1950s, the New Orleans sound was developed by pioneering R&B and rock and roll artists. Recorded at Cosmos Pitasso's studio in the French Quarter were such classics as I Hear You Knockin' and Blue Monday by Smiley Lewis, Tutti Frutti by Little Richard, Tipatina by Professor Longhair, Lordy Miss Claudie by Lloyd Price, and My Blue Heaven by Fats Domino. Preservation Hall was established on St. Peter Street in 1961 and, up until the recent shutdown, offered nightly performances of traditional New Orleans jazz. Now, during the 1950s, Hollywood capitalized on the New Orleans mystique, with 10 movies being released that featured the city, including Marlon Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire and Elvis Presley in King Creole. Over 300 full-length movies have been filmed in or set in New Orleans beginning as early as 1909. By the 1920s, movie studios opened their offices here in the city, such as Fox and Warner Brothers, and here you see their studios in downtown New Orleans, up until fairly recently when Tulane recently tore them down. Some of the more notable movies filmed or set in New Orleans will include Naughty Marietta in 1935, The Buccaneer and Jezebel, both in 1938, Saratoga Trunk in 1943, Suddenly Last Summer, 1959, Toys in the Attic, 1963, Hotel, 1967, Easy Rider in 1969, Pretty Baby in 1978, Cat People, 1982, Angel Heart and the Big Easy in 1987, JFK in 1991, The Pelican Brief in 1993, Interview with a Vampire and the Client in 1994, Runaway Jury in 2003, The Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons in 2008, The Green Hornet in 2011, and very recently, The Green Book in 2018. In 1950, the Louisiana Landmark Society was established by local preservationists to save Gallier Hall from demolition. They would lead many of the city's early preservation efforts. Their mission today is to promote preservation through education, advocacy, and operation of the Petite House. In 1951, Tennessee Senator Esther Kefauver conducted a 14-city investigation into organized crime. Of course, New Orleans would be his first stop investigating the mafia's influence here in the city of New Orleans. The 150th anniversary of the Louisiana Purchase was celebrated in 1953 with a visit by U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower. Many civic projects were accomplished during Mayor Morrison's administration, including the construction of Union Passenger Terminal, which replaced 5 very historic train stations, some of which were designed by very noted architects such as Louis Sullivan, Daniel Burnham. These very historic buildings got wiped out for consolidating them all into this one station. Now, a new city hall was built in 1956, as well as a civic center complex completed in 1959, destroying a very historic neighborhood, which you can see in the lower right there. The Pontchartrain Expressway opened in 1957, a new airport in 1959. Underpasses and overpasses were built throughout the city during this time frame. In 1955, the Friends of the Cabildo were organized to support the Louisiana State Museum and served as a watchdog group at the request of the State Museum Board, which there were several indictments and convictions for activity going on at the museum. They became a pioneer of historic preservation in the city of New Orleans, and they were chartered the following year. In 1955, Pontchartrain Park opened in the Gentilly neighborhood for middle-class African Americans. The University of New Orleans opened in 1958 in the former Naval Reserve Base on the lakefront. And Southern University, originally established in New Orleans, which moved to Baton Rouge, came back to the city of New Orleans. The oil industry became a major force in the city's economy following World War II, and the surrounding parishes of Jefferson, St. Bernard, and St. Tammany grew in popularity. The economic, modern, ranch-style house, influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright's innovative designs, became the popular response for the increasing housing needs, especially when the Veterans Act would not allow financing and the finance and purchase of older houses, which made the need for these newer houses by all these returning veterans. Now, there were numerous neighborhoods that developed in the city during this period. And here I've got a list of them from 1940 to 1970 and some illustrations from the newspaper. So there are all these things developing towards the lakefront and out towards New Orleans East. And I'm not talking getting into St. Bernard in Jefferson Parish or St. Tammany Parish. You can just see the explosion of subdivisions here. Now, urban sprawl was spurred in 1951 with the widening of Tulane Avenue, then known as the Miracle Mile. Now, Tulane has shrunk back in size, where they have put the median back and so forth in that and reduced the number of lanes there post-Katrina, but it widened it on out. There were no left turns on it. It became known as the Miracle Mile. In 1956, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway opened up, and in 1958, the Greater New Orleans Mississippi River Bridge and Veterans Highway were opened. The city's first gay carnival crew, the Crew of Yoga, was established in 1958. Its 1962 ball was raided by the police and the crew folded. A noted New Orleans architect, Leon Impostata, had told me he was at that and he hid in a garbage can to avoid being arrested by the police. Now, the population of New Orleans reached its peak. It's 627,525 in 1960. However, the census that year indicated that New Orleans has lost its status as the largest city in the South, with Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, and Miami all boasting greater populations. Suburban growth increased during the 1950s and 1960s with integration and white flight. The first major civil rights protest in New Orleans was the John McDonough Day boycott of 1954. Every year, public school students honor the man who left half his fortune to the education of the city's children of all races. Under protest of ceremonies where African American children had to wait to participate until all white children, only 34 African American students out of 32,000 African American students showed up that year. In 1957, the Southern Christian Leadership Council was founded in New Orleans at the New Zion Baptist Church on 3rd Street, in the upper right there. A very young 28-year-old minister named Martin Luther King Jr. was elected as its first president. While the state officials fought integration, the city was generally more receptive. In 1958, the city streetcars were very quietly desegregated. However, in 1960, it was a different issue when they began to integrate the public schools. Thousands rioted the day after 4 young African American girls entered 2 white public schools. When the state legislature ordered the closure of New Orleans public schools, the Orleans Parish School Board argued for peaceable integration of the schools. Federal marshals actually had to enforce the 1954 Supreme Court ruling. Also in 1960, African Americans began to boycott the local businesses and stage sit-ins at lunch counters on Canal Street as well as Dryden Street. On May 4th, 1961, the first Freedom Riders left Washington, D.C., headed for a rally in the city of New Orleans on Greyhound and Trailway buses. They were challenging the South's segregation laws. Led by the Congress for Racial Equality and the Students' Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, these activists were trained in nonviolent protests here in the city of New Orleans. The ride, unfortunately, ended in Mississippi on May 17th after numerous violent attacks. There were 9 other freedom rides, including some on trains that year, either leaving New Orleans or terminating in the city of New Orleans. Yet New Orleans was one of the few southern cities with a very large African American population where widespread violence did not erupt during integration, thanks to the efforts of Mayor Victor Skiro, seen in the lower left there, and civil rights leader such as A.P. Turo, seen in the upper right there, as well as the local business community, which understood the economic reality of African American boycotts that had happened in other southern cities. Catholic schools were integrated in 1962. The following year, Tulane University was integrated, as well as New Orleans lunch counters. Mayor Skiro desegregated City Hall and appointed African American assistant department heads. During the 1960s, a New York-style Lincoln Center style cultural center was planned adjacent to the Municipal Auditorium in Treme. Blocks of Treme were demolished, and after the Mahalia Jackson Theater was built, it was apparent that the city could not complete the plan. So a Tivoli-style park was planned, but that was then had to be scaled down to the present Louis Armstrong Park configuration. In 1960, French President General Charles de Gaulle visited the city of New Orleans. A fountain in Jackson Square was dedicated to him, and a West Bank street was named in his honor. The interstate highway I-10 was begun in New Orleans in 1960 and completed in 1972. In 1961, New Orleans entered the space age with the development of the Michoud Space Center, producing critical components for America's space race. They helped the growth of New Orleans East, which began in 1960. In 1964, another British invasion hit New Orleans. Oops, here we go. Hit New Orleans with the Beatles performing in City Park. The following year, 1965, the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet, or the Mr. Go for short, was completed. The 76-mile-long federal project begun in 1957 led to major flooding during hurricanes in 1965 and 2005. It was closed in 2009. During Scarro's administration, Hurricane Betsy struck the city of New Orleans in 1965, causing a great deal of flooding and property damage. The Bear is best remembered for his quote during the storm on WDSU TV, "Don't believe any false rumors unless you hear them from me." In 1966, the Historic New Orleans collection was opened, endowed by Kemper and Leah Williams. The museum's initial collections were the personal collections of this couple. New Orleans was awarded a national football franchise on All Saints Day in 1966, and the Saints played their first game the following year. In 1966, the historic Claiborne Avenue, with its double alley of oak trees, was destroyed for an interstate highway. The passage of the 1966 National Historic Preservation Act created the National Register of Historic Places. Here in New Orleans, the French Quarter, the Cabildo, Jackson Square, the Old Ursuline Convent, and George Washington Cables were among the first to be listed on the register. Today, we have 22 historic districts and 157 individually listed buildings on the National Register. I'm not talking city, HDLC, I'm talking National Register here, because National Register predates the city districting. In 1967, New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison arrested local businessman Clay Shaw and tried him in 1969 for the assassination of President John Kennedy. It took the jury less than 1 hour to acquit Shaw. Lee Harvey Oswald, Kennedy's assumed assassin, was born here in New Orleans in 1939 and lived in 9 different locations seen on the illustration on the right here in the city of New Orleans. President Kennedy made a visit to New Orleans a year before his death, addressing thousands at City Hall. During Scarro's administration, the planning for the Superdome was begun, and a new convention center, known as the Rivergate, now demolished, was built at the foot of Canal Street in 1968. Also in 1968, Longview House and Gardens opened in the home of Edith and Edgar Stern. The following year, in 1969, the crew of Bacchus made its appearance as the city's first super carnival crew. Established by local businessmen who wanted to rejuvenate carnival and to boost the city's economy, Bacchus broke with tradition by having a celebrity king, large floats, excessive amounts of throws, and no tableau ball. Today, more crews follow the model of Bacchus than the Olan crew model. In the year 2020, Carnival had an economic impact of $840 million in the metropolitan area. I know I haven't updated the screen, but I'm updating the information that I've given you on the economic impact. In 2020, there were 33 major parades and 13 smaller ones here in the city of New Orleans. There were 24 parades out in the suburbs. Crews spend millions producing their parades and post-parades. I know I'm on the board of the crew of Bacchus, and our annual budget runs about $5 million a year. So this is a very large economic impact. In 1969, the Riverfront Expressway, first proposed back in 1946, was finally defeated in what was dubbed the Second Battle of New Orleans, as was a sound and light show at Jackson Square. The end of the 1960s saw numerous Vietnam protests throughout the city of New Orleans, especially by college students. Residential architectural taste reverted to the very eclectic designs during the 1960s. The first New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival was held in Congo Square in 1970. There was an earlier festivals promoting jazz here in New Orleans, such as the Jazz Fest 68, which was held in the Municipal Auditorium. In that festival, Pete Fountain, Duke Ellington, Ramsey Lewis Trio, and Louis Armstrong performed. It would be Armstrong's last performance in the city of New Orleans, and his final song, "Will the Saints Go Marching In." In 1970, Moon Landrieu became mayor. He helped further integrate city government departments with the appointment of African-American city department heads. A major event in Landrieu's administration was the battle in the Desire Housing Project, where he sent in 250 armed police in a tank to evict Black Panthers from their headquarters on Piety Street. New Orleans hosted its first Super Bowl in 1970, and it has since been the site of 9 more Super Bowls. In 1972, New Orleans voters approved a tax to support a rejuvenation of Audubon Park, then referred to as a ghetto for animals. Today it is regarded as one of the finest zoos in the country. That same year, the city's gay community hosted its first annual Southern Decadence Festival, which has become the 3rd largest tourist event in the city of New Orleans, following Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest. Terrorism hit New Orleans when Mark Essex, seen in the middle of the screen there on the bottom, opened fire atop the downtown Howard Johnson, killing 9 and wounding 13 others on December 31st, 1972. The next year, on June 24th, 1973, an intentional fire set at the upstairs lounge in the French Quarter killed 32 gay men at a function for the Metropolitan Community Church, which was planning a fundraiser for the Crippled Children's Hospital, now known as Children's Hospital. Roger Nunez was arrested but escaped from a psychiatric clinic, but was never recaptured despite being seen numerous times in the French Quarter. He killed himself the following year. 1974 was the first Bayou Classic football game between Southern and Grambling universities. It was held in Tulane Stadium. Louisiana Superdome opened in downtown New Orleans in 1975, sparking construction of high-rise structures on Porter Street, which had been widened during the Skiro administration in 1966. The Porter Street boom of the 1980s was a tribute to the impact of the oil industry on the city's economy. One Shell Square, now the Hancock Whitney building, is the city's tallest building. It was completed in 1972, topping out at 697 feet. In 1976, the Contemporary Arts Center opened in the Warehouse District for the visual arts, concerts, and lectures. It spurred the development of the Warehouse District art community. During the 1970s, appreciation for the city's architectural heritage was aroused, and numerous historic districts were created. During that decade, several house museums opened in the French Quarter, including the Beauregard Kai's house in 1970, the Herman Grima house in 1971, and the Gallier house that same year. They followed the opening of the 1850 house in 1956 by the Louisiana State Museum. In 1971, the Friends of the Cabildo produced the first in a series of its books documenting the city's architectural heritage. There are currently 8 volumes. As I mentioned last time, I've got Carrollton at the LSU Press right now, and I'm working on the French Quarter book, which would be number 10. In 1973 through 75, the Growth Management Study outlined a plan for CBD growth while preserving its historic architecture. In 1974, the Preservation Resource Center was established as a private nonprofit group to help preserve the city's architectural heritage. It's an outgrowth of the Friends of the Cabildo's preservation efforts. A lot of the same people formed the PRC with some help from the Junior League, but when the Friends decided their mission was more supporting the museum than preservation, that effort kind of shifted on over to the PRC. A new state law allowed for the creation of historic districts statewide, and in 1976, the New Orleans Historic District Landmarks Commission was created. St. Charles and the Lower Garden District were the first 2 districts created. Today, there are 14 city districts and 4 more under consideration. That same year, Moon Walk opened up along the riverfront in the French Quarter, where the Riverfront Expressway was once proposed. Numerous groups of immigrants began to arrive in the city during the 1970s. Vietnamese refugees settled in New Orleans East, attracted by the city's fishing amenities and the Roman Catholic tradition. Central Americans fleeing unrest in their country were also attracted by the Catholic faith and warm climate. New Orleans Museum of Art in 1977 held its blockbuster exhibit, The Treasures of Tutankhamun. That same year, the city's gay community held its first major civil rights protest against Anita Bryant's anti-gay organization, Save Our Children, in Florida. The city's Italian community dedicated the Piazza d'Italia, designed by noted American architect Charles Moore in 1978, as an urban pocket park. In 1978, Ernest N. Morial was elected as the city's first African-American mayor and served until 1986. During Morial's administration, New Orleans became a majority African-American city. Under his administration, New Orleans returned to its riverfront. In 1984, the World's Exposition was held along the riverfront, leading to subsequent development of the riverfront and a streetcar being established along the riverfront, as well as the new convention center, Riverwalk, the Jack's Brewery shopping complex, which has now been converted to a lot of residential, the Aquarium of the Americas, and Wildenberg Park. In 1978, the federal government created the Jean Lafitte National Historical Park, with units in Barataria, Acadiana, Chalmette, and the French Quarter. The French Quarter unit opened in 1980. Under Morial's administration, the French Quarter Festival was begun in 1984 to bring locals back to the French Quarter. The spring event now draws thousands of tourists to the city, and unfortunately this year got canceled due to the corona crisis. That same year, Louisiana State Museum offered to the public the Sun King, Louis XIV, and the New World exhibit. Celebrations in the Oaks began in 1985 as a winter festival of holiday lights in City Park. One of Dutch Morial's major challenges was the police strike of 1979, which canceled carnival parades in New Orleans. The strike, however, did not stop the first Crescent City Classic, which took place that year. Another issue Morial had to deal with was the May 3rd, 1978 flood, which produced 10 inches of rain and 5 deaths and $240 million of damage. There would be other floods in New Orleans in 1988 and 1995. In 1986, the Tennessee Williams Festival was held in the Quarter with its famous Stella and Stanley Screaming Contest. In 1986, Pope John Paul II visited New Orleans, hosting events throughout the city. The following year, on May 8th, the Cabildo burned. That same year, the city hosted the National Republican Convention in the Superdome, and the second span of the Crescent City Connection opened. During the 1990s, tourism and gaming helped to reshape the city's economy as the oil industry's impact began to diminish. The second and third phases of the convention center were opened along the river, making it one of the largest in the nation on one floor. Industrial buildings in the warehouse district adjacent to the convention center were rehabbed as hotels, and Canal Street buildings that once housed major department stores were converted to hotels. In 1990, Bayou Sauvage National Wildlife Refuge, a 23,000-acre reserve in New Orleans East, opened as America's largest urban refuge. The Aquarium of the Americas opened along the banks of the Mississippi River in the French Quarter in 1990 as well. The first Essence Music Festival, celebrating African-American culture and music, was held in New Orleans in 1994 and is today one of the top 5 tourist events in the city. That same year, the New Orleans Jazz National Historic Park, primarily based in Louis Armstrong Park, opened up. In 1994, White Linen Night was established to celebrate the Warehouse District arts community. It's held on Julia Street the first Saturday in August and draws thousands in white linen attire. In 2001, Dirty Linen Night was established for the French Quarter's art community the following weekend. You're supposed to wear your white linen from the previous weekend that night. In 1996, a ship, the Brixton, crashed into Riverwalk, injuring 140 people. The Ogden Museum of Southern Art opened in 1999 in the Central Business District next door to the state's oldest museum, and the Voodoo Music and Art Experience premiered that year. In 2000, the New Orleans Arena, Jazzland Theme Park, now shuttered, and the National World War II Museum all opened. In 2001, the city hosted its first New Orleans Bowl in the Superdome. In 2001, Ray Nagin, a businessman with no political experience, was elected mayor and began to clean up City Hall and city corruption. However, Nagin would eventually be convicted of corruption himself and incarcerated in 2014. In 2002, the city acquired a professional basketball team when the NBA approved the move of the Charlotte Hornets to New Orleans. The following year, New Orleans celebrated the bicentennial of the Louisiana Purchase. In 2005, the city was struck by Hurricane Katrina, and the failure of the federal levees after the storm put the city nearly 60% underwater. Post-Katrina, the city of New Orleans has experienced a major rebuilding campaign with new municipal buildings, hospitals, and roads. $20 billion was spent on 350 miles of levees around the city of New Orleans, its floodgates, pumps, all to protect the city. In 2015, the University Medical Center opened, and the following year, the Southeast Louisiana Veterans Health Center in Mid-City opened up, destroying much of the historic fabric of that neighborhood. In 2010, our beloved New Orleans Saints won the Super Bowl. It was a much-needed moral boost to the city in its post-Katrina years. Mitch Landrieu was elected mayor in 2010, and according to Landrieu, he is most proud of removing the city's Confederate monuments. However, he will be most likely remembered for the skyrocketing crime during his administration and New Orleans being dubbed as the nation's murder capital. In 2014, the Crescent City Park opened up along the banks of the Mississippi River, downriver from the Vieux. It's further opened up the Mississippi River to non-port activities. In 2015, New Orleans celebrated the bicentennial of the Battle of New Orleans, opening up the Lafitte Greenway, a concept which was proposed in the early 20th century, and its planning in this year began for its tricentennial. In 2017, the lack of maintenance of the city's drainage system became apparent when on August 5th, the city flooded with 9 inches of rain. Much of the city was flooded for over 12 hours. Many of the pumps were not working, and the system's power failure despite millions of dollars being pumped into it by the federal government post-Katrina. In 2019, there were numerous broken pipes, boil water orders, advisories, and flooded streets. In 2018, LaToya Cantrell became the city's first female mayor during the tricentennial. 2019, the controversial Kalis Hotel project, which was allowed to exceed the zoning height limits, collapsed while under construction, killing 3, injuring many, and shutting down portions of the French Quarter and CBD. Towards the end of the year, the city opened up its new airport, despite not having the access fully resolved. In 2020, the city, like the rest of the nation, is dealing with the coronavirus, with the city being shut down, numerous loss of lives, cancellation of festivals and parades. Now, today, New Orleans faces many challenges. Tourism continues to be the chief source of economy as the impact of the port begins to diminish. New Orleans is one of the top destinations in the world for tourism. In 2018, 13.7 million visitors came to New Orleans, spending $9 billion. The presence of the Mississippi River, the very reason for our existence, is now being enhanced. Now, I'm finishing up with a line from The Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons. Now, tell me, after all that, did you learn anything worth repeating?
Thank you so much, Robbie. That was fantastic. If anyone has any questions, please do send them in through Q&A. I think we have a couple minutes to ask. I know it's 3:30, so we're supposed to wrap up, but I want to make sure that we get
stay on to ask any questions. I see my little banner here. I'm sorry. I need to click this off? Here's Q&A up here. I see up top. There's only one there.
Yep, just one question so far.
What neighborhood is shown in the slide? I'm not really sure. I think that was sort of a community set up to isolate people during the Spanish influenza. That's something I found online for the Spanish influenza in New Orleans, and I can't tell you where it is. I'm sorry. Let's see. Can I recommend a book on other? Last time I said a good overview for the history of New Orleans would be Leonard Hubert's A Pictorial History of New Orleans, which gives you, I've used some, borrowed some of the images there and so forth for this presentation. That is a pretty good overview of the city of New Orleans without getting into detail. If you want to get into any detail, such as the Spanish influenza or the mob in New Orleans, or certain architecture features, or the Choctaw Club, there are books that are written specific to those. In my library, I'm always adding to it. I'm always looking for things on New Orleans history there. When did Tulane University, Tulane or Loyola purchase the land property from Leland College? Actually, Leland is where Newcomb Boulevard is. There's a lot of, if you look into the Friends of the Cabildo, the university section, we go into the history of that. The developers of Audubon Park sold land to multiple people during the time frame, or options to buy there. It's a very complex history in there. But Leland is not under the, Leland is upriver from Tulane University. You had Loyola, Tulane, then Leland. Leland was where Newcomb Boulevard is. And we can very well document that through Sanborn maps, other maps, and photographs and so forth. Let's see, that's all I'm seeing here. Oh, wait. Thank you. Thank you. When was the decorative cast iron railing produced in other cities or imported? Okay. The earliest ironwork will be wrought iron. It's hand forged, quite often made locally. Then as we move into cast iron, the earliest cast iron will be imported into New Orleans because we're a port city. Cotton, sugar is all leaving on the boats. It's coming down with, it's coming back with brick, cast iron, stone, all sorts of things. They're coming in originally from Great Britain. Then cast iron is going to be coming from the eastern seaboard for the most part. We have a lot of cast iron coming from New York, Philadelphia. Most of the cast iron industry in New Orleans, from the last presentation, I talked about the vacuum pan method of sugar refinery invented by a free man of color. Most of the local cast iron industry was in that business. Now, where the PRC is located today, the Leeds Foundry, they really didn't produce cast iron. They were a distributor. It's like would be going to Home Depot today. It's made somewhere else and it's handled locally. The Miltonburgers did the same. Anne Masson and I've forgotten who else co-authored a book on local cast iron, and there's a lot of good information on that. Shameless plug, where else can you feel the kind of start on if you have more questions? We're close, but working from home and would love, okay. Yes, the HDLC has a great deal of information with them. They also have all the illustrations from the Leonard Hubert book. It was donated there. They are a wonderful resource. I use them all the time, particularly for the architectural series books. We're using them. Some of their stuff, for example, the Vieux survey is online. They have a great deal of information that you can get online there. Why didn't you mention the demolition moratorium or to stop the wholesale demolition of the buildings that was occurring in the late 60s? I'm sorry, I'm not aware of, I do a thing on historic preservation in New Orleans from the 50s through the 80s, and I'm not aware of one in the cities. That there is a demolition order put in later times when the HDLC has been formed, when the Wallace-Todd report is done, but I'm not aware of one in the 60s. I'll have to investigate that. I know Tulane University has a preservation timeline with major events that you can look there, but I'll have to add that to my report. I'll have to investigate a little bit more. What are the two books you are writing? And I hope you will present a Zoom Pro. Okay, the two book, one right now at LSU is New Orleans Architecture, Volume 9, Carrollton. That is going to be out soon. I'm already working at nighttime right now for a Zoom presentation on that, taking the illustrations for the book and trying to put that together. I'm still dealing with LSU and the format of the book. The other book I am working on is on the French Quarter. It'll be different than the rest of the books. On the other books, say Carrollton, I've only done information on 975 buildings, which is a small fraction of all the buildings in the former town of Carrollton, or the footprint of that. We're doing every single piece of property in the French Quarter, even those that are parking lots today. We're going to talk about what was on those lots. So it'll be twice as big as the other books. Is there a source for reliable information on the Axman murders? You got to be real careful. There's been a lot of TV programs made by the Axe murders. What I did was, the illustrations that I showed, I went to the newspaper and I got period accounts. I think that's the best thing. I am a subscriber, and I'm not plugging them. I am a subscriber to genealogybank.com. But the New Orleans Public Library, you can research local newspapers. You put in your library card number, you go to their databases, you put a keyword in, such as Axe murders, and it'll pull up newspaper accounts. I would trust the newspaper accounts is firsthand information. For the French Quarter book, for example, I am not relying on any secondhand books that have been written about the French Quarter. We're going to all original sources, archives, newspaper accounts, things such as that, and not relying on the Moonlight Manure stories. When did the Haitian immigrations arrive in New Orleans in the 19th century? Let me go back to my notes here. We get this tremendous influx where the city's population nearly doubles with these Haitian immigrants coming into the city. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling through the notes here. They opened up some of the first, they opened up the first theater in the city of New Orleans. Okay. Between 1791 and 1810, the city's population increased following the 1791 Santo Domingo slave revolt as these French Creoles began to arrive in the city of New Orleans, opening up schools. In 1792, they opened up the city's first theater, and one of these refugees opened up the city's, established the city's first newspaper in 1794. They really dramatically increased the population of the city of New Orleans. So between 1791 and 1810. Demolition ordinance was passed to cover St. Charles Avenue at the time. Yes, there was a demolition order on St. Charles Avenue, but I thought it was later than that. I do have that on my presentation, which I did. I'm trying to remember what group it might have been, the PRC even, that was done at the Historic New Orleans collection. No, it was the Preservation Matters. Yeah, that was the PRC event, Preservation Matters. I did a preservation on that with all those dates, and if the PRC wants, I can do it as a Zoom there, but all those preservation efforts I do have well documented, and it's about as long as this presentation I gave you today of all the different preservation efforts. And when you're dealing with over 300 years and 300 hours, you can only get so much in, and I'm way over time now. I don't mind staying here, but there's only so much you can get in. I'm sorry. I know different people have different interests, and of course, my interests are kind of put into here, heavy on architecture and things such as that. You wrote the ordinance and give me the details. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Robbie, thank you. We are over time, and I know that people need to go. This has been a long class, but it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. It sounds like we should talk. There's a lot of other topics that maybe we should see if you could come back and cover sometime. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who's been here today. Thank you again to Stephen Richard Parnes for sponsoring our online classes. And Robbie, thank you, and everyone have a wonderful weekend.
All right, thank you all. Sorry I couldn't answer all the questions.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.